Good morning. My name is Sheila Lamb, and I'm with the Virginia SBDC Network. For those of you that are not familiar with our organization, the Virginia Small Business Development Center is a partnership program between the U.S. Small Business Administration, George Mason University, and local host institutions throughout Virginia. With 26 locations across the Commonwealth, we provide training and technical assistance to small businesses in their local communities. Our one-on-one advising services are available at no charge. Today's webinar, Leading and Expanding Craft Beverage Business, is presented by the Virginia SBDC Network. Save the date for our next webinar in our craft beverage series, August 7th at 11 a.m. Building a Better Beverage Brand, and I'll drop the registration link into the chat momentarily. We are recording today's presentation, and it will be posted on our website, virginiasbdc.org. Due to the large number of expected participants, everyone's microphone is muted and the chat feature is turned off. But if you have questions during the presentation, you can type those into the Q&A box. We have also enabled the live transcript function, which you can show or hide via your own meeting controls. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the Virginia SBDC Craft Beverage Assistance Program Manager, Chris Van Orden.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this conversation about leading a craft beverage business to and through growth. As Sheila said, my name is Chris Van Orden. I'm the manager of the Craft Beverage Assistance Program at the Virginia SBDC. So today's program will be a free-flowing discussion on how the heads of craft beverage businesses can prepare themselves and their organizations for growth. As Sheila mentioned, you can enter any questions that you might have in the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to answer them all either during or after the webinar. So I'm excited to welcome today's speaker, Scott Harris, who is the founder and general manager of Catoctin Creek Distilling Company. With his wife, Becky, Scott founded Catoctin Creek in 2009, growing the craft distillery from a small team to a national leader and industry advocate. I've asked Scott to join me today to share some of his experiences managing a scaling business. Welcome, Scott.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate you guys having me here today.
Oh, absolutely. Appreciate you coming in and joining us. It's great to sort of hear from a leader in this space. So thanks for your time. So, right, we're talking about sort of the craft beverage industry, which tends to attract people with a wide array of backgrounds, right? There's not necessarily people who say, I graduate from high school and I'm going to get on the track to open and run my own craft beverage business. So I always like to hear what attracted leaders to the drinks world. What's the story behind you co-founding Catoctin Creek?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. So we've been doing this, my wife and I, for 16 years. It seems like quite a long time now. But we both had fulfilling careers as engineers. Becky is the master distiller of our company and our president, and she's a chemical engineer. So she had worked in industry doing things like contact lenses and computer parts. And then I was a government contractor. I was a software engineer. So I worked for 20 years in government. And I always like to joke on my tours that 20 years of government taught me a great love of whiskey. But our story of coming from engineering into craft distilling and craft beverage in general is not uncommon. You know, there's a lot of brewing owners and winery owners, and who either have second jobs, day jobs, or whatever, and are doing this job because it's their passion. And that's kind of what brought us into it too. On one hand, I can't think of the number of people who actually went to school for this and studied this and then got into this at both the ownership level, but also at the worker level. Like every worker we've ever hired was somebody that we had to train up on the craft beverage space. They weren't trained in it.
Yeah. It's not really presented as an option a lot of the times when you're young and thinking about these things. Obviously, 21 being the legal drinking age. It's not even something you have experience with by the time you've sort of selected your track. So
right. I mean, they do have some schools, University of Michigan, and there's some other universities that have programs for this. I think even Virginia Tech has some enology programs. But by and large, we see workers and owners coming from outside the space.
Sure. Yeah. In my own experience, I used to work for the government as well before I got into the industry, and that's passionate about the product and then apply the skill set. That makes a lot of sense. So
right.
So you and your wife founded Catoctin Creek back in 2009, which in this sort of life cycle of the spirits world is more or less a lifetime ago. Where sort of did you start out with the company, and kind of where are you at today, sort of showing the progression over time?
Yeah, we've kind of lived a full life just in the 16 years we've been doing this. When we first started, our sole ambition, the only real aim of the business plan was to make enough whiskey to sell it to the Virginia ABC. And here we were talking like, 50 cases a month, which is really not very much at all.
Hmm.
And just to sell it to the Virginia ABC, and that was it. That was our sole ambition. Um, at the time, we weren't allowed to have a tasting room. We weren't allowed to sell bottles on site. We weren't allowed to pour tastings on site. None of the experiences that you could have at the winery could be had at our place when we started. We actually had to get those laws changed over the course of time so that we could have that full sort of winery experience at a distillery.
Hmm.
So now we're at that place, but at the beginning, it was just wholesale distribution to the Virginia ABC. And as we grew, quickly we got into Maryland and DC, and then we got into New York, and we started picking up, every couple of years, a couple more states. So now we're in about 20 states. We also started doing some international distribution. So
Hmm.
Europe, UK, Taiwan, and there's been a few countries that we used to sell to that we no longer sell to, like Singapore. But we never envisioned any of that happening. And then, of course, in alcohol, as many people in alcohol are probably aware, it's very cyclical. So we've seen already, a big boom cycle, and now we're in currently an alcohol bust cycle that's kind of industry
Hmm.
wide, both with wine, beer, and spirits. But also, we went through COVID, which is like extra hard. So, we've kind of seen a lot of different things and crises, and kind of still here to talk about it, unbelievably.
Yeah, yeah, it's a testament to, making it through. And I think it's comforting to hear, maybe for companies that are at an earlier stage, that you didn't have the grand vision exactly how it was going to pan out for you 15 years ago and know
Right.
exactly where it was going to go, because, right, obviously there's all the externalities. There's no shortage of surprises that have come along, and the cycles and all of these things that are outside the company. But I'm sure within the company too, there have been opportunities that you didn't know. You mentioned sort of selling internationally, opening up all
Mhm.
these other markets. In the beginning, it was Virginia was your target, and you've achieved that, and then some, which is
Yeah, yeah. That there's when we started, the distilleries that were starting up, and truly even the breweries that were starting up at the time, were basically, mom and pop affairs, small family setting it up, and running it locally. And I think that's still largely the case for most of the breweries, even the bigger ones like Bear Chase, and Vanish, it's still a family running that.
Mhm.
But what we saw in distilling, actually, I don't know, about 5 or 6 years in, is we started seeing big private equity money coming in,
Mhm.
and people who had had full careers as like, Wall Street financial guys who had lots of money to lay down. And so then we started seeing some of our competition popping up that would overnight, have a $5 million distillery just overnight,
Mhm.
and so that was kind of unusual in the distilling space, because I think it did attract some of that big money, who could just sort of cookie cutter something overnight.
Yeah, yeah. There's we are here at the SBDC, we are here working with small businesses, right? Knowing, of course, that no matter almost any sector, small businesses are also out there in the marketplace with maybe some big players, and they're playing a different game sometimes. So,
Right,
even though your scale has grown up a lot over this time, it's still, a family run business, and
right.
there's a lot of room for that. So I guess that's a quick question that would be I think helpful is, you mentioned 50 cases a month to start. Sort of, what's the sort of range that you're in these days?
I like to talk cases, vary, depending on whether people are talking 12
Sure.
packs or 6 packs. What I always talk about as kind of a level set is bottles. And so we're presently at about 100,000 bottles a year. So, we deal with 6 pack cases, so divide by six, or if you deal with 12 pack cases, divide by
Hmm.
12. But it's like 6,500-ish 6 packs, I believe,
Yeah.
that we do. So that's, still a relatively small scale operation compared to most, national brands.
Yeah. But given the stature of the company, and you obviously have lots of medals to your names at this point and stuff, that's you can do a lot without having to be, in 20 states and in international markets without being, 50,000 cases, right? It doesn't.
Right, right. I mean, people are sometimes surprised that that have come across our brand, say in Las Vegas or Utah or someplace like that, and they are often surprised to see the small, compact nature of our production facility.
Mhm.
We can produce quite a lot. Actually, we're under capacity in our current production facility on Main Street in Percival. But it is, it's a small, compact facility, and it doesn't take a lot of space. And
Mhm.
frankly, if you ever visit, some of the larger name Scotch brands over in Scotland, they're also quite
Mhm.
compact. Even Woodford Reserve, we visited them a while back, and their main production facility is not significantly larger than what we have. What they
Mhm.
do have is huge barrel warehouses that we don't have, so they have much more stock in barrels.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. There's all that liquid needs to go somewhere.
Right, right.
Well, I mean, so right, this you mentioned the company's kind of scaled up over time, done a lot of new things. So, with you and Becky kind of at the helm, I'm sure that you've both worn a lot of hats
Hmm.
since the early days. So, how have your roles shifted over time, and kind of what responsibilities have you been able to delegate and other things that may in order to make room for other needs that have come up?
Yeah, it's an interesting balance, and it's like even a larger entrepreneurial discussion outside of just beverage, right? It's like,
Hmm.
at what point does an owner decide that the owner is no longer the most efficient person for doing that job, right? It's such a hard question to ask,
Hmm.
especially to ask owners who don't want to give up that control. Um, Generally speaking, an owner will tell you that they can do the job most efficiently, right? And so then to train up somebody to have that responsibility, give up that control. Most owners are control freaks and micromanagers, and so they don't want to do that, right? And so I struggle with that, I'll admit.
Hmm.
My job beginning, we like the division of labor between me and Becky has always been sort of Becky's the producer of the whiskey, so she cooks the whiskey, and I cook the books. So I do the alcohol books, I do the financial books, and then I was doing Facebook and that kind of stuff as well. So all the books. And at the beginning, I'm entering every invoice, I'm entering every journal entry, I'm doing essentially the bookkeeping completely.
Hmm.
And do I need to be doing that? No, I could hire a competent person to do that. But there's some specific sort of tailored things that have to happen that we do that nobody running like a print shop or a restaurant would have to worry about. Like for instance, we have a weekly minimum weekly reconciliation of all the inventory of the liquor that is in the tasting room. So the liquor store part of our business, because we have to report that to the Virginia ABC, and so we have to account for all that stuff. So there is an accounting, and a closeout process that happens. So it's fairly specific, which has prevented me from like hiring just like remote bookkeepers that don't actually set foot in our building. Because, if
Hmm.
a bottle of rye whiskey is missing up front, you've got to walk up front and like count them and see, where did it go? Things like that. So those are roles that have shifted to more of like actual employees, people that work in the building here that I've transitioned to them. We've ebbed and flowed in sales as well. Like I am an engineer at heart, and I like finances and accounting and stuff, but I
Hmm.
hate sales. I hate going into sales meetings, right? And yet,
Hmm.
there's times when that's necessary. So there's been times in our past when we've had, large sales teams, and then times when, frankly, we've had to contract and pull that back and not have, 30 people out in the field, selling our products. Um, so, when we've had those contractions, Becky and I pick up the slack. We might make those trips up to Boston or to, Nashville or wherever to do those sales visits. But generally speaking, that's a job that I know that I would not like to do, and a job that
Hmm.
I would not probably do as well as somebody who has that fire in their belly that I don't have when I'm doing it.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a story that I've heard from some people, right? Some people love that element and they
Mhm.
that's their favorite thing. And
Those extroverts.
yeah, and I am sure, even if it's not a thing you love, people in the marketplace love to hear that one of the owners is
Yeah.
visiting. There's a something that
There's a real, yeah, there's a real benefit to that is why we continue to do it, because you're right. That they like to see the owners.
yeah, which is nice, but I think it's kind of telling that, the things that you've more readily given up are the things that aren't really the elements that you enjoy the most. And, if you have the engineer brain, the sort of orderliness of, the sort of bookkeeping and the
Right.
reporting to TTB and ABC, those are things that, maybe aren't a drag on you in the same way they would be for, I don't know, me, for instance, right? That's
Hmm.
I don't think anybody's ever mistaken me for an engineer. So I think that that's a good lesson for people if they're having to delegate, right? There's the sort of I think it's a replacement value, right? Of, is there somebody who could do this cheaper than your time is worth or more
Right.
efficiently?
Right.
But there's also, right, in the end, the personal element of, well, does this make my day better or worse when I do it? And
Right. Well, it's like label design. Like,
Mhm.
there was a point where we were doing all of our own label design, but it kind of looked like we were doing it. Our early labels looked kind of, homemade and not super professional. And we had to come to a reckoning that we needed to hire actual talent, people that were
Mhm.
skilled in that job to consult with us and design something that was new. And so we did a brand refresh like around 2016. So it's been a while now. Um, but that brand refresh was really, really necessary. We, like a lot of companies, got to a point where our labels just looked like a hodgepodge of different things we'd sort of thrown together, which is exactly what they were.
Mhm.
And so, having something that competes on a professional level with any of the big whiskey companies or any of the big liquor companies in the national, international stage was really important. And so that was something that we paid money to do, knowing that, we just didn't have that expertise, of it. And that's a point where, it's like if I am not the most expert person at it, yeah, I could probably like bully my way through it, but it might take
Mhm.
me 16 hours to do something that would take somebody 20 minutes.
Right, right. Yeah, there's that expertise that exists out there. And I'm sure there's always times of, you mentioned having an accountant in-house because they need to regularly go up and count bottles
Right.
versus an outsourced design. You don't have massive design needs, so it might be an outside firm that you engage kind of as a
Once.
one-off, right?
Right. As a one-off. Exactly.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
all of that takes some thinking through, while also resisting the urge to be the running your business at a start as a startup, which is, I'll just do it myself. Like, I won't sleep tonight, I'll get it done. And it's like,
Right, right.
there's a
Yeah, there's a delicate balance of doing it all yourself and then, are you running your business or is your business running you, right? I'm sure there's
Mhm.
lots of talk about that, right? What level of dedication to your business are you comfortable with? And then this is a personal thing for every different person,
Mhm.
I think. But like, we have for in order to maintain some kind of sanity after 16 years, we have sort of had to put the business on a leash, right? And so like I very heavily try not to. We often work maybe half a Saturday doing like a workshop or something, but
Mhm.
I almost always try not to work on Sunday, and just like that is time. And if people are emailing me, if people are calling me on that, I'm ignoring it, right? I'm setting those limits and I'm putting sort of some rules in place to protect, our peace of life. And, we need downtime too. We're all human. So um, it feels sometimes indulgent to do that.
Mhm.
And it shouldn't, right? I mean, we all deserve like a day off. But people will call you at the last minute for anything, and it could be some super important restaurant or hotel, and you want that business, and so you set those rules and then you break them all the time.
Mhm. Yes, it's always easier said than done, and
Yeah.
you're getting that third phone call from a key staff member and you say, okay, this seems like
Right.
it'd be
It's
a big
easier with
deal.
my staff members because I can bark at them like it's Sunday. I was taking a nap. But when it's, a customer that represents a big hotel chain or something that you really were hoping to get, then you're like, okay, let me bend over backwards again.
Yeah, yes, I know that's a lot to say no to. Well, I guess that kind of brings me to sort of my next thought here about the sort of philosophy behind all of this, right? Sort of preserving the time for some mental space and right, not letting the business run your life is
Right.
part of that. But how do you approach your leadership at Catoctin Creek? And do you have a sort of governing philosophy when it comes to leading this business?
Yeah, we do. And so, Becky and I are both engineers. So long ago, from day one, we set the stage with a pretty process-oriented company, right? So we built processes. We were pursuing from day one being an organic and kosher distillery. And
Hmm.
so to be organic and kosher, it's a very regimented process, right? You have to have, lists of ingredients and procedural steps for all the production and be able to track lot numbers through the system and be able to track from batch number all the way back to lots of grain and yeast and things like that. So we both came from process backgrounds, albeit Becky's in manufacturing and I was in computers,
Hmm.
but those skills went directly into writing all of our standard operating procedures and having all those forms and checklists and things. And so we really didn't struggle with that at all. And that was useful because even as a two-person company at the time, which you'd say that's way overkill, it set the
Hmm.
groundwork for us to grow into, a company that had, at some points 20, 30 people.
Yeah.
And to have like the people that were working for Becky producing the same quality spirit that she would produce, so that she didn't have to do all the actual cooking herself. And that's where we are today. So we have that. I would say as a management philosophy, we both came from a time when the emphasis was really on team oriented production. And
Hmm.
so, we value the teams. We have a very flat organization. It's kind of Becky at the top, me kind of off to her right hand side, and then
Hmm.
everybody below us just works at the same level. Like we don't have a huge structure of management and things, middle managers, and it's not necessary for a company like ours. And our philosophy has always been very sort of um lead by doing. And so, Becky for sure, and me to even a little bit lesser extent, but she's always, willing to do any job in the building, So, I mean, even cleaning the toilets when the toilets are dirty and they need cleaning, she'll go in and do that, and I will too. And I think what that does is just show our team by example. Like, the one thing we won't tolerate is somebody saying, well, that's not my job. You need to talk to so and so about that. Everything is everybody's job. We all care about this company equally, and we all have to work to make it successful. And I think that's a good formula for success for us. People understand that equality. And if they don't get along with that, if they don't agree to that, then they're not going to last here very long.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I like that you brought some of that your own sort of process thinking to this, but also the roll up the sleeves and carry that over even when, you do have people, I guess, technically underneath you. It's still, hey, there is
Yeah.
no real hierarchies here.
Right.
Um, so speaking of the staff side of that, right, and getting people in and having people kind of on the same page as to how this organization runs. Um, on this human capital front, what are some of your strategies that for hiring, retaining, right sizing your team? Are there any kind of lessons you've learned maybe the hard way in that area over time?
Um, yeah, when we've had hiring, like if we needed to hire salespeople that are out in the field, like, maybe like a guy working in Texas, right? I don't know anybody in Texas. So,
Hmm.
there's a couple hiring platforms that have been pretty helpful for us for that. BevForce is one
Hmm.
that we've used in the past, and it's kind of like Indeed, but it's focused on the beverage industry.
Hmm.
Um, and so we've hired successfully people off of that. You get 10 resumes, or well, you get hundreds of resumes and you whittle it
Hmm.
down to the 10 you want to talk to, and then pick a couple out of that. So that's been good for just finding talent. Many times the people that work here in town, like our distillers, are people with whom we've had relationships with in some other way, right? They were either, they worked somewhere else and they came to us. We've had multiple servers from restaurants, come to us and say, I'd really love to be a distiller. This is my dream, and at the time, if we had the spot available, then we would hire them in. We've had a number of people like that, who are in this small community of sort of hospitality people in the DC area. Um, we've had that's probably the most of what we've had, or people that were adjacent to us in some way, you know, like a mechanic that worked at the auto mechanic shop that was 2 doors down, who said he really wanted to work for us. And, you know, so we took him on and things like that. So a lot of the distilling and like people that we serve in the tasting room are from those kind of networks.
Yeah, yeah, that's I mean, yeah, going back to the fact that very few people come in with a fully fledged thing. I think, yeah, there's if it's relational, it's also a good lesson to people who are maybe listening who want to get into the industry, like get to know people, right? Be aware of what's happening, throw your hat in the ring, and you never know what's going to happen, even if, yeah, the
Yeah,
upskilling is possible.
it's worth saying that any one of the people that's ever come in wanting a job from us had any experience doing what we do, and we don't expect that, right? So the interesting thing is, like, we can train you. What we're looking for is not somebody who's an expert distiller who knows all this and knows all that. We're looking for somebody who has the capacity to learn, right? And a work ethic, right? The biggest thing that most people lack is a work ethic, right? Like, distilling is a glamorous job. People think so, but you're essentially a janitor. You're constantly cleaning every day. You know, it's like a brewer.
Mhm.
You know, you make the beer, sure, and it's great, and you're super proud of it. But then at the end of the day, you got to clean all that stuff up, right? And
Mhm.
people don't really take that into account. And so it's a physical manual job too. There's a lot of lifting, and there's pulling
Mhm.
hoses and, you know, this kind of stuff, and driving forklifts. And so, you know, not everybody is suited to that kind of job. And there have been times when we've hired somebody to do that job and then they've quit within the first week. Like, they're just like, whoa, this is not what I thought. I thought we'd be standing around taking beauty shots in the barrel warehouse, you know, like, no, that's not what happens most of the time.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
I will also say that there was a period in the time of our company, which I'm super proud of, and kind of laugh about, that all of the kids that I coached soccer for like 12 years
Mhm.
became 21. And I hired like 6 of them all at once to help us with bottling. We had a big rush in production. And so I had all these knuckleheads that were my soccer kids, you know, that I taught growing up, who were suddenly available to do bottling and stuff. And it was kind of this fun little time when you know, they had like this little clique amongst themselves, you know, all working together, a bunch of boys, you know, 20-year-old boys who were just kind of crazy, but they were getting the job done. And it was kind of good to get, you know, some talented hands in that were, you know, relatively inexpensive as well.
Mhm. And they're used to being coached by you, which is nice.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, exactly. I was taking advantage of a network that I had that was unrelated to distilling.
I think that's a good lesson, right? You know, everybody has their other networks. If you're in a run club, or if you're,
Yeah.
right, other maybe disaffected government employees that are looking for a side gig. I mean, hey, that's
Right.
a
Or you have some online gaming club or something. Who knows?
yeah. And I mean, it sounds like half the job of retaining people is getting people in, being clear about the expectations, right? It's one of those you're not going to be standing around in plaid, you know, with barrels or around you
Right.
in this beautiful setting. It's you're cleaning, you're going to be wrapping pallets. Like this is the job.
Right. And if you're done with that, there's always something else to be done. Right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
self-starters, you know, people who take initiative are super well appreciated. And you know, somewhat uncommon. You know, a lot of people kind of just wait for the next thing to fall in their lap. And so, you know, finding those people that are real self-starters is a real benefit.
Yeah. I think that sort of hiring people rather than skills is
Yeah.
you know, except for the very most technical thing. Like if you have a QC lab, somebody needs to know.
Yeah, I will say, you know, it's, as an owner of a business, an entrepreneur, you know, one of the things owners will talk to owners about is how do you get your employees to take on a sense of ownership, right? And so it's often, you know, you can do things like, you know, grant some incentive stock options and things like that.
Mhm.
We've done that in the past as well, to try to get, you know, their interests lined up with your interests. But what I'm talking about is sort of a larger sort of chasm, which is, you know, we learned, like, you know, one of my peeves in the early days would be like, one of our employees would come up to us and say, Scott, the water fountain's broken. And I'm like, I don't want you to come and tell me the water fountain's broken. I want you to come and tell me, hey, the water fountain was broken, but I was able to find a good rate from this plumber, and for $200 we can get it fixed. Do you approve of that? Right. That's what I wanted. And that was so seldom happening. And I was at first thinking that he was being lazy in doing that, but what I learned was more complex than that. It was actually that this business that Becky and I built, he viewed it as sacred. Like, this is our home,
Mhm.
Scott and Becky's home, and how dare I touch it? Right. And so we had to sort of like break that spell and be like, no, this is your home too. You live
Yeah.
here as much as we do. And please, feel the initiative to take that initiative. And so then when they started to do that, if they did something slightly different for what you wanted them to do or what you expected, you had to be sure not to jump down their throat, right? Because they're putting their toe out there and trying to take a little risk, and you want to reward that. So, being very, very sensitive to that was something that, we had to learn as well, and how to get those mindsets shifted. And, it's still not a perfect thing, but that's what we look for.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that empowering staff to make decisions and, take the initiative, right? Knowing and being clear about where the line is, right?
Yeah,
Here's how far you carry something before you sort of need to sign off. Like you can make a mistake of this size, anything bigger than that. And now we're talking about like, okay, yeah, like put it
right,
on my
right.
plate. So I guess that brings me to the next question of, can you share any examples of when your team was struggling on a bigger issue and how you kind of decided to help lead them through that?
Um, well, there's the whole COVID thing, right? Like, COVID was a big struggle for all of us, and we were really all struggling to figure out what our jobs would be.
Hmm.
Um, and so one of the pivots that we did early in COVID was hand sanitizer, right? So um, the entire restaurant world that were our customers was shutting down, right? And they weren't sure at the time if they would even survive, and many didn't. And so, we had to do a lot of deep, hard thinking. And so, one of the benefits we had was my experience and Becky's experience as engineers, and particularly my experience as a government contractor. We knew how to do government contracts. And so we
Mm.
quickly started up a hand sanitizer operation. Basically all the spirits, that drinkable spirits, was shut down. There was no whiskey being produced. There was none of that. And so, we started putting in bids to places like, the Virginia Department of Health for
Mm.
pallets of hand sanitizer, enough production to keep us running. And we were successful in doing that. We were successful in um, getting those enough of those orders to keep our lights on. We were selling the hand sanitizer, buying the raw materials, and then selling it to the state, selling it to sheriff's offices, selling it, and then mostly giving it away to the public that came to the distillery. Um,
Hmm.
and and in doing so, we were able to not fire any of our employees, right? So what we had is about, I don't know, a dozen employees at the time. And we had salespeople who were out in market, right? But these salespeople's job at the time was to go to restaurants and say, hey, do you want to buy some whiskey? Hey, do you want to buy some whiskey? And the worst thing we could have done at a time when these restaurants were having a fundamental, challenge of their existence, was go into them and be all greedy and say, how much whiskey are you going to buy, when they might be shutting down, right? So I pulled those salespeople away from the field and said, for the next, I think it was 6 months, that we said, you're going to be in here bottling hand sanitizer. We all are, like, everybody, all hands on deck, bottling hand sanitizer. And we sort of set up this operation of bottling hand sanitizer and getting the right kind of plastic bottles, and all the kind of things that we had to do. The benefit was that none of those people got furloughed, right? Everybody kept their job at Catoctin. We were all essential employees because we were producing, this hand sanitizer. But, there was also a downside in that, we had all these extroverts in the distillery, and it was driving us crazy. All these salespeople were so bubbly and partying and having a
Chatty,
good
yeah.
time. And so finally we are like, all right, now it's done. Go back to work, start selling whiskey again, get out of here. So
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's very nice to hear about how you're able to do right by all your people and, find the way. But yes, I can imagine you get 10 salespeople in a room. My gosh. Yeah. The
yeah, you
din.
can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a lot of chaos, more than the soccer kids.
So, and there's, yes, finding a way to make these things come together, and a lot of it, right? It's a business, right? In the end, it all does come
Mhm.
down to the sort of the balance sheet, right? Where are you at a given time. So
Right.
so much of the, being a leader is setting that vision, aligning the resources to get there. So when you're trying to plan out ahead, knowing how chaotic this industry can be, how do you balance the sort of long range planning required, right? I mean, you have infrastructure improvements that take a long time, just multi-year aging of products with these short-term sales cycles, policy shifts, all of these things that happen to you. How do you balance all of the sort of competing demands for, right? If you did like an updated business plan, like 5 years from now, how do you do that with all the things going on?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. So, in a larger sense, like we kind of know in a very macro sense, like what our overall sales kind of needs to be, and where we should target production with. And we had to learn that you can't just produce willy-nilly, or you'll go out of business very quickly.
Hmm.
Whiskey is expensive. It costs a lot of money, and once you've put it into the warehouse in the form of a barrel that's going to be aging for multiple years, you can't get that money back, right? The only way to get it back is to finally sell it, right? And so in a boom time, it really is tempting to just go open the taps and just go as full bore as you can, right? But boom times don't last forever, and so for the past 2.5 years or so, it's been declining, and a lot of people with thousands and thousands of bottles or barrels of inventory are caught with their pants down and unable to unload it at any price, right? They're trying to sell it bulk, and the prices of bulk whiskey have fallen through the floor, and so they're suddenly panicked, right? And going out of business. A very, very large distillery in Ireland, went out of business because of this. And so, managing that inventory, we've always tried to manage it to be about, 1.1% or 1.1, so 110% of production, right? So we're producing about 10% more of production than we expect to have in sales.
Mm.
And the warehouse becomes, to use computer terminology, like a buffer, right? So if we have a big surge in orders, like we've had a couple times in the past where we had like 6 new states come on all at once, right? And so we have to
Mm.
get hundreds and hundreds of cases out all at once. We can dip into that buffer, and then Becky can double up production and catch back up in a shorter period of time than it took to produce it, right? So she could do double shift production for 3 months and then catch that back up to the 6 months she drew down on,
Mm.
things like that. So we do have some flexibility in that warehouse, but we don't want to keep an overabundance of whiskey in there. So that is one thing. The larger sort of cyclical periods of the year, we know now, we pretty much understand, the fourth quarter is going to be strong, the third quarter is going to be second strong. The summertime is early summer is usually pretty dull, pretty dead, and then January can be kind of dead because people are all dry Januarying, and they spend all their money at Christmas, and they're
Mhm.
on diets, and they're trying to lose their weight again and things like that. So we kind of try to plan for those down periods, and then it's a bit cyclical, so reap the benefits in October, November, December when we can.
Yeah, yeah. It's it's a lot of variables at play, of course.
Mhm.
And again, knowing that unlike some other products, I come from the beer world and um, you have the scale of your system, but you could just churn out more beer and it takes a week to a couple of weeks and you have more product.
Right, right.
Game.
We don't have that luxury. We
Yeah.
have to predict, and it's hard to predict. So we have our production has, ebbed and flowed. During the boom times of 2022, we were running 8 shifts a week. So we were running basically, 5 days a week, but one of the days, or 3 of the days, we were
Mm.
running double shift, right? And so that's challenging. Double shift is extra stress on the equipment and the people. But it was working, and we were doing that. But then, now we're running like, I think, 3 shifts per week. So we have it kind of, at a dull roar. There are companies in this bust period that have shut their production entirely, but I fear doing that because we will lose people that we need, talent that we've trained. We will lose also, suppliers, key suppliers that we have really good arrangements with. And so, we have continued to keep our production matching our inventory, and I think that's the way to do it for us. Um, I don't have any, perfect answers there, but
Sure.
we try to sort of keep in tune with that market, and keep our overhead down.
Yeah, you can optimize as much, hours doing this, trying to get it perfectly right. But that's all based on historical data. And the only thing we know is that next week's not going to look like last week. And,
Right.
year over year doesn't really hold anymore. So,
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear the sort of, hey, that always having a little extra product, but not stepping on the gas all the time it's a tough thing to get right for
Right.
all kinds of reasons.
Right.
So I wanted to circle back to something that we talked about a little bit earlier on about sort of when you're hiring people that, um, you find ways to give people the skills is more about kind of work ethic, willingness, kind of wanting to be there, wanting to work for your company in particular, that kind of
Mhm.
thing, the personality fit. So I'm sure, some of this happens for the people at the helm too, right? Again, we're talking about people from all different backgrounds, and you have certain skills that are translatable and other ones you need to acquire. So given your background and sort of what you've wound up doing for the company, what resources have you drawn on to enhance your own skills and, whether it's in the leadership capacity or some more technical areas of the business?
Um, yeah, if I think about myself as what is my sort of core skill set, I would say executive management, right?
Mhm.
Running a company, right? So directing the different, chambers of the orchestra or whatever you want to say. So, I have done, I've never gotten an MBA, I've always been tempted to do that, but
Mhm.
actually at this point, it's probably too late. I don't know that I need it. I'm not really going to benefit from it, but I have consulted with several classes at Georgetown in their
Mhm.
MBA program. So we actually do a lot of capstone projects with their students, and so offer ourselves up, and then spend an entire semester working with the students on some particular, financial based problem that we're facing, whether it's exports or something else.
Yeah.
And so I do get, I learn from that as well. The students are always super bright, and then I get rewarded from that, just having that experience, and I think it's beneficial to the students as well. So and that's sort of the ways I sort of keep myself sharp. Um, Often, what we're learning in the business also is, through the different industry associations that we belong to. So, for
Mhm.
instance, my wife is the past president of the American Craft Spirits Association. And so, that includes a whole range of things from, what are the key issues that members care about, membership management, planning a convention, which is a lot of work,
Mhm.
lobbying in DC and lobbying at Richmond, right? So all those factors go into making her a very astute industry player. Um, for myself, likewise, being the president in the past of the Virginia Spirits Board, I'm currently the president of that organization, which is in close association with the Virginia Distillers Association, which I used to be affiliated with as a leadership person. Those kinds of things, awarding grants to different industry players, running the marketing office and things like that, hone those management skills. On the technical side, it's more, learn as we need to, learn as we go, and seek out those people if we need some particular knowledge. If I have something like I run our website, I'm the cheapest computer science guy I know, so I run all the website and do all the computer science work and all the IT administration of our company. If there's something I can't learn on YouTube, then I'll find somebody who knows the answers to these things. But usually, actually, I can learn a lot on YouTube.
Mhm. Yeah, that's if you have a good baseline, you can pick things up. But I think it's interesting. I think really informative to just the sort of being open to those uh, opportunities that maybe whether it's formal or informal opportunities to kind of put yourself out there. It's like, hey, this is not directly, the like adding to the bottom line of, hey,
Right.
yeah, you're contributing in sort of a to the industry as a whole, and you guys have been really great advocates for the industry with right some of the trade policy issues in the past, and right, you mentioned even the tasting room issues. Like that's there's a rising tide kind of thing here that's going to help everybody,
Yeah.
but I'm sure the skills that you acquired through these different positions that may be one step outside of your core areas that you do for your business there's so much to be gained from that, not just kind of putting your head down and only working in your like inside your four walls, but
Right, totally. Yeah, there's I think one of the largest benefits of collaboration. We've collaborated with local brewers, but we also collaborate with some Virginia distilleries to do different projects, and wineries and cideries to make brandies. And it's some of those collaborations that really enrich our lives, beyond just, the measure of trying to make a product out or something like that. So yeah, there's value in that collaboration, if nothing else for your soul.
yeah, yes, it's I'm sure when you've been running a business as long as you have, you sort of feel like every inch of the place, and it's nice to be kind of creating new pathways in the brain sometimes.
Well, and also it's nice to have sort of people to talk to about the things that bother us, right? Like, we
Mhm.
can complain with another distiller, like, oh my gosh, are you having this problem with such and such? It's such a pain. Like, how do you deal with it? And just, if nothing else, to sometimes be able to vent, to somebody
Yeah.
who understands and knows what you're going through.
Yeah, there's nothing new under the sun sometimes, and yeah, other people have experienced it, and I
Yeah.
definitely encourage. It's a nice industry in that people are usually willing to share their experience, and whether it's a horror story or a workaround that they share,
Right,
either way, or if you're just kvetching, there's something good about that too.
right, exactly.
So, on a different front, right, we've kind of talked through some of the difficult periods that you all have been through. Are there any kind of leadership decisions or strategies that you've employed along the way over this, right, kind of a long arc of the company that, with the benefit of hindsight, you would have made some adjustments or anything like that? Any?
That's a good question to ask. There's different levels of that. One of the things we didn't appreciate early on coming into distilled beverages and beverages in general, was the value of branding. But Becky and I are both engineers, so everything was sort of black and white, right? We looked at the Code of Federal Regulations, we understood what the labeling requirements were, and everything technical that needed to be on our label was there, and they were perfectly legal labels, but they were
Mhm.
absolutely not sexy and beautiful, right? And we didn't value that. We were like, what's in the bottle is sexy and beautiful. The label's just a
Mhm.
label, right? And that's not really the reality of spirits, right? People drink with their eyes. They see a bottle on the shelf and they choose it first based on how pretty it is and what it looks like. And
Mhm.
so that was something we had to learn. And it took us quite a while to learn that, because I mean, I'm slow. But so that was something that if we had come out of the gate with more of that experience, boy, we'd be dangerous today. The and there's been various times where, we've made some management decisions, where that, in hindsight, maybe we would have done some things differently. But even some of the largest, things that turned out to not be beneficial for us, we were operating on the information we had at the time, and
Mhm.
probably would have made the same decision again had we had the same set of circumstances. There wasn't anything there that was like a red flag that said, oh, you shouldn't do this. Everything that seemed good at the time would have led us to make the same decision again. So, in that sense, you can't be too hard on yourself. You can't be a perfect person and decide everything.
Yeah, there's no Monday morning quarterbacking here. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
right.
you can't say, "Oh, sure would have been nice if I didn't scale up production right before COVID." Well, yeah,
Right, right, or whatever, yeah, gosh, who didn't
so
see
be it.
COVID coming, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Be a little bit graceful with yourselves, for that.
Yeah, but I do think that your point about the sort of branding is, hey, you're both, you and Becky are both in love with the product. You're really focused in on, of course, right? First and foremost, you need to make sure that, like, yes, your labels are legal, that you've done everything correct. But I think that the sort of lesson of, hey, there's all of your core capacities that and right, even just putting all of this in front of another set of eyes of somebody with totally different skill sets and be like, what am I missing? Hey,
Right,
it's this you kind of those unknown unknowns. There's always some of that out there for everyone, no matter how well versed you are and well rounded you are. So it's always good to this way. It's important to talk with other people in the industry. There might be people who are really good on branding and maybe just are not in love with the process, and
right.
they could learn from you and vice versa.
Well, at least I tend to be sort of make a decision quickly even if it's not the optimal decision, and then adjust it quickly if it turned out not to be the optimal, rather than sort of analysis paralysis, right? I'm the very opposite of analysis paralysis. Some people, Becky, would say, I might even be hasty, right? But I do that, and that's just my nature. And so we would probably make a decision quickly, but then abandon it quickly if it turned out to be the wrong thing. And I think, I don't know, it's just part of being agile. I think you have to be more like that than you could be of trying to get all the quorums. I know people that were wanting to start a distillery and never got started because, the first thing they did was like, okay, well, we're going to visit 100 distilleries, which sounds like a lot of fun, but it's a big sink of money, right? I mean, spending all that money going around, and you're not going to learn after the first 3, you're not going to learn anything more from visiting all the others. And they, it ended up never really getting started because they just kind of piddled around too long.
Yeah, the diminishing returns, right? Yeah, there's at what point do you have enough information to act? I think that's
Right.
a really important lesson for leaders, especially some people who might be prone to, hey, I don't want to do anything until I feel 100% confident. There's no
Right. You're never
100%.
going to get that. That's a luxury you don't have
Yeah.
ever.
Yes. Yes. That's and even if you did, right, then things change and it doesn't matter
Right.
anyway.
Right. It's why, in software and government work, one of the programs I loathed the most, and maybe this will rankle somebody, I don't intend that, but one of the programs I loathed the most was Microsoft Project, right?
Mm.
Because you could spend all day making the perfect plan and it would be obsolete tomorrow, right? And so I never saw the point of that. It's like, let's plan on a larger macro level and then
Mhm.
adjust all the little minutia that happen day to day. But some project managers, PMPs, wanted you to have it down to the day, to the person, to the whatever. And it's like, oh, well, Joe called in sick today, so he didn't write the graphical user interface he was supposed to write today, and so that you're spending more time updating the plan than you are actually just doing the work.
Yeah.
And so it was the tail wagging the dog. So that was something that always rankled me. And my only solution to that was to quit entirely and go make whiskey.
Yeah, there's something nice at a certain point of, hey, you're making a beverage here. At a certain point, the job is to make a beverage and get people to drink it. And
Right.
if you're doing
Right.
that, then you're winning.
Yeah,
Um,
we like to say we're not, it's not rocket science we're doing here.
yeah, yeah. Well, Scott, I really appreciate your time. I guess before I let you go here, do you have any parting thoughts on sort of leadership in this industry that you might want to share with our audience today?
I would say, where we are today, if you read the spirits news and the beverage news, those sites that collaborate or what combine all the different news articles
Mm.
together and things like that. We're in a down period. There's lots of layoffs and production cuts, and spirits are down at Pernod 30% this year, and blah blah blah. So it's kind of a depressing time to be in this industry. I would say though that the key to survival is probably continuing to have something that a product that people are excited about, which is easier said than done. And if that's not working, pivoting and finding what products are people excited about, right? And how do you generate that excitement? There are factors here that worry me outside of my control, like, the layoff of the federal workforce. That's a large portion of our customer base. And if they're not feeling comfortable, they're not going to be spending money. There's not much I can do about that, so we're trying to sort of, brace ourselves for those kinds of issues that might be coming. But for the largest part, I think you have to have that daily excitement and drive to keep your business, fresh and healthy. Um, Unless you're doing something so easy that you can just print money, which, we don't do.
Yeah. And if you do, please let me know what your
Yeah.
idea is.
Yeah. Me too. I'm available for hire for that job.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise and experience with the audience. It's been very fun to hear about, somebody who's been doing this for a while and helped to grow a business to, a leader here. So really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.
I agree. Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Chris. And thank you to all who joined us today. As a reminder, you will receive an email with a link to this recording. If you would like to sign up for upcoming webinars or access recorded webinars, please visit virginiasbdc.org/training. These resources are designed to be used in collaboration with your local SBDC advisors. You can sign up for a free and confidential session by emailing help@virginiasbdc.org or via our website. And we hope to see you all at our next session. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.